Okay, now we're ready to
All
go.
right.
Since Valerie is presenting, I will introduce Valerie, test score gaps and time. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, John. And I just want to say I'm encouraging lots of questions, lots of people saying, don't do things this way. This is the way you do it in education, because I feel a little bit like Rip Van Winkle. You'll see why. So I started working on this paper in 2010 or 2011. Here's the original motivation, several motivations for this long gestation paper, which is still only 35 pages and not completed. So first of all, way back, it comes from a personal interest in improving my local public schools. And what I did was I was trying to figure out how well they were serving, say, for example, students who had highly educated parents. And I figured out that I could get all this information from the California scores. So I did a lot of that, and then rabble rousing with Scott Baker's mother. We got rid of the principal at the high school, all that kind of stuff. But eventually I bailed and our kids ended up in private school. But still, it was interesting. But she kept Scott in UC High, and he did very well. The other is some work. So I was doing a lot of time use, the century of work and leisure, time spent in home production over the 20th century. And then Gary and I wrote a paper called The Rugrat Race, where we documented the significant increase in time spent in childcare in the US and explored possible explanations. So that got me finally linking my long-term interest in education with time use sorts of things. Then also my informal observations when I was at UCSD. Back in the days where we had paper, I have hundreds of students in the class, and when we'd give back exams, when they were paper, we'd put them in these piles of, alphabetical. And then I noticed over time, suddenly you had to have a pile of the C's just for themselves. And I said, what is this? Well, it's Chang, Chow, Chen. And there were no Smiths and Jones in these hundreds, but lots of Changs, Chows. And I said, geez. And so then I looked in 2010, I said, geez, Asian Americans are approximately 12% of high school graduates in California. So I should have said in California there, but 34% of the admits to the University of California. And then given that I was doing time use, I said, oh, I wonder if they study harder. And I did some histograms, and I said, oh, they sure do, and you shall see them. Well, the timing was perfect because Amy Chua's Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother came out, and I was asked to write something for our econ department newsletter, Economics in Action. And so I wrote up a short paper for that. Is there a tiger mother effect, time use across ethnic groups? And Amy Chua, I sent it to her, then she linked it on the social media. And then I started working on this with one of our graduate students, Ling Xiao. And then we did a short paper where we used American Time Use Survey and ELS 2002, and that became one of the chapters in his dissertation. So I've been doing this for a long time, and every few years, somebody wants me to give this. I update the data, and I said, I've really got to get back to this. Well, a few months ago, I was, honored to be named the Thomas Sowell Senior Fellow. And in fact, reading race and culture is what got me interested in this. So I said, all right, that's a sign. I need to get back to this project. So there was a lot of fiscal crowding out. That's why I didn't have time to do it. So I'm trying to make time. So the question is, can time use explain why Asian Americans have higher average educational achievement, or how much of that can be explained by that? Now, if you look at the distribution of Asian American test scores, in high schools and other measures of educational achievement, that distribution lies significantly higher than for other groups, even within schools, as I'll show you. Now, many point to culture, and that's the first thing that usually occurs. But it struck me, it's hard because culture is not a direct input into the production function. And so then the way to think about it is, how does culture affect the inputs, and particularly inputs that we can measure? So what I argue here is, let's think about time use, because I think that could be a key input. So as an outline, I'm going to give you test score gaps across groups using the California data. I'm going to talk briefly about education production functions, then time use differences across groups. And then the challenge, and this is one of the reasons that I didn't just immediately write this up, is I'm going to show you so far correlations. I have a lot of ideas on how to show causality, and that's where I'd really like to have some feedback on it. So first, test score gaps in California. All right, other than the fact that I'm in California, there's a good reason to focus on the California public schools. First of all, 28% of all Asian Americans live in California. So that gives you the largest sample of Asian students in any US educational data set, as far as I know. And this is where I want the experts to correct me if I'm wrong about this. In 2020,
that's about slightly more than double California's share of the overall population.
Yeah. So in 2025, just like they do almost every year, except during COVID, the California public schools administer statewide standardized tests to 2.9 million students. By the way, that number is going down over time in public schools across grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. And of these, 309,000 were Asian Americans. The California public schools are standardized tests. They're highly publicized, high stakes tests, in contrast to what we saw in some of the survey data where they test them for only 30 minutes and it's not the high stakes test. And at least when I had worked on this a number of years ago, it was 3 hours, at least 3 hours for each test. And I think that's probably still the case. All right, so these are really comprehensive. These are the kinds of test scores you want to look at if you're looking at K through 12. So a few details on these data. So the state of California is not as progressive as the state of Texas. They don't release to researchers individual student level data. But as I figured out that I know of, do they now? You had a look on your, do they release the individual ones now?
Under an MOU, which takes a million years to negotiate. but
Yeah,
Okay. This is great. This is great.
Governor
All right.
Wilson.
Don't mention my name.
I won't, okay.
I think Wilson was governor. He tried to get these, and
But I could, because I had a lot of education colleagues at UCSD, like Julian Betts and stuff. And I know back then, you couldn't, so that's great. But you'll see how far I can go with test score averages, because I have them by school, by grade, by ethnic group, and the socioeconomic class broadly, whether you get free or subsidized lunches or not. So at least there's something there. There are, it's surprising, there's 10,222 schools, public schools in California, okay, each with multiple grades. So we're talking about a lot of cells. And then the ethnic groups I have in the more recent data is, white, Black or African American, Hispanic, Latino, American Indian, Asian, Filipino, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Torobor races. All right, so for the descriptive statistics for California, just a basic regression. M is the mean scale score for a particular subject test. I'm going to look at both math and English language arts. In school S for grade G for ethnic racial group J. The D's are indicator variables for the ethnic racial groups, and the whites are the omitted group. And then the X is a vector of control variables. I don't have that many, but there are some key ones, as I said. So it's a weighted regression. The weights equal the number of students with scores, and then cluster standard errors by the school grade interaction. And that's based on recommendations years ago from my UCSD education colleagues.
you have no interactions with racial groups.
No, because those are going to be the separate, kind of one. I do some estimates separately by socioeconomic group. And I forgot to mention it at the beginning, so where's Megan and Sophia? Sophia here? I thought she said, oh, there you are. Okay. They're the amazing undergraduate research assistants who processed all of the data. I said, here's what I did for the 2019 data. And then they got all the new data, and of course, things change. And they also did the American Time Use Survey. So they are experts at the American Time Use Survey and the California test. So they did a great job. And the only reason I'm able to present updated data today is because of the great job the two of them did. All right, so here are the estimates for math. All right, so this is a mean scaled math score relative to whites. The mean test scores are around 2,500, standard deviations around 125. It'll differ across grades, but this is just everything together. Standard errors in parentheses. So the Asian test score gap, say in the first column relative to whites, is somewhat smaller, but not that much smaller in absolute value than with Black and Hispanic. And so much of the focus has been on Black and Hispanic, that test score gap. I think that when I saw this, I said, oh, I think we can learn a lot from the Asian white test score gap, just because that's interesting, but it might also give us insight into the other test score gaps. Now that's where the only fixed effect is the grade. So then the second column interacts grade times school. So this is within school. So you can see that they go down, some to 47 for Asian, but it's still really, big and statistically significant. It goes down quite a bit for Black and Hispanic. So the school could explain some of this, but there's still a lot left over after putting in the grade times school. And then the third column shows you when we also put in the economically disadvantaged, basically a dummy variable for that.
But this is for at the school level. What is the value?
This is the school grade ethnic level. So I have a cell.
Economically disadvantaged.
So they take all of the kids, say, who are Asian American, who are in a school, who are economically disadvantaged, and give you that mean scale test score.
So you don't interact that with the variable. I would have so is economically disadvantaged Asian or economically?
No, it's any. So each
They're
set.
not interacted with race, it's all economically disadvantaged.
Yeah.
relative to
Yeah.
race.
So
But then I'll show you where I do it separately for the two.
Your unit of observation is the school, right?
No, the unit of observation is an ethnic group school grade
Average,
test,
average,
the average for that cell. So there are a lot of cells.
So in
normalized by the standard deviation.
These aren't normalized, but I'll show you some normalized. So I gave you the standard deviation there so that you can see.
in the Florida data, and at least so my impression is that there is the Asian tend to self-select more
Into,
different. So what I'm worried about, I'm trying to understand what are you doing this,
yeah,
that the Asian are very selective in terms of where they go. They're less in terms of school district.
yeah, no, but this is within school and grades. So this is, so I am comparing the mean score of Asian students in grade 3 in Curie Elementary School in 2025 to white grade 3.
There could be different type of advantage. So suppose that a wealthy Asian is more likely to move to select a school that is a higher quality than a wealthy Black.
Okay.
What I'm worried about is there a way for you to, in this aggregate data, to do that?
I don't think so. Now, I'll show you soon, just within the
So,
economically disadvantaged group.
Additional resources.
Mhm.
My impression is that those that actually, so if you go to the culture story,
Right.
those that prefer to invest in education,
Mhm.
they're gonna put all the, all the resources they have into education rather than other things. That means that are more likely to self-selecting the better school.
In the better.
So and so the question, it would be interesting to know
That
if
would,
you
that would
have.
lower the code, right? If that were the case, then within school, it would all be.
Could be that the
across schools.
coefficient is driven by the fact that in that particular schools, so it could be that in the coefficient is driven by the fact that the Asian are wealthier in that. What I'm worried is individual income
Now-
driving the result.
Now, are you sure, you know, within public schools, that's a possibility, although, you know, you have to move to the neighborhood. But something I've casually observed, I think, but I don't, maybe people will know. It seems that the Asian are more likely to stay in the public school where the upper income white will go to the private school. But there's this sort of public school is free and so they're still willing to do it because they can overcome that. But does anybody know about the selection there? Because this is just public school. So there's all kinds of levels of selection.
At one point in the census, I tried to ask this question. My impression by income, though,
Yeah.
the only thing I could control was income. And my impression is that it really depends on the type of offers that you have.
Mhm.
So the perfect example was the school where my kids went in Evanston. Very diverse type of school. Asian prefer to move to Wilmette, Winnetka.
Mhm.
So they choose the public school, but they choose the public
Right.
school that, you know, in some ways, using the money better. I argue that that's a good representational. And so I wonder whether this election is
Yeah.
going to do anything. I'm not 100% sure I fully understand
Okay.
the regression, but that's one thing.
Yeah.
I would think.
I mean,
But
this
she
is
does
basic.
have grade by school fixed effects, so it's not comparing across Wilmette and your
Right.
kid's school. It's,
Yeah, so
it's
more-
just
But
within.
she's saying because my economically disadvantaged indicator is so rough, it's just a
So
0,
suppo-
1.
so
You're not, you
this
might
is
not.
What I'm thinking.
But you know, higher income, I mean, at least I remember in the Rugrat race, the higher income didn't lead to more time spent on their children. This was parent time, but higher education did. I mean, and so that would be the ideal thing to get.
Yeah,
But
so Rick, what I'm thinking is, suppose that you have a choice of a bad school or a private school. I think the Asian would move to the private school. If they have a choice between two neighborhood, you know, school, I don't know the example
yeah.
here, Evanston versus Wilmette, they're gonna move to the municipality. And so that kind of, if you care about education, you're gonna really make a decision, which is, and so that kind of selection can do something to who is left in the public school, and then who goes to what type of school, and that interaction I think is worth thinking about.
But she's got the selection of the whites into Wilmette also.
yeah,
I mean, and so she's taking a comparison only of Asians to whites within Wilmette.
Yeah.
So you could see some deep interaction, but I couldn't think that that would be a first order effect.
It would be interesting to know that.
Well, if there's an aspirational selection effect, which I think you're suggesting, that would work against the coefficient.
that's what, John said.
Not,
Yes.
Sorry, Valerie,
Oh, yeah.
apologies, I'm joining from Houston International Airport. Just quick question while we're on the regression. I was just curious, you mentioned on the previous slide, covariates. Do you include average family size by ethnicity? Because I could see that, okay, because I could see that being negatively correlated both with ethnicity and with test scores. You know, if you have fewer children, you invest more in each child.
I could look at census data on that. But you know, in terms of within this, all right, here are English language scores. There's still a gap, but it's smaller. So remember, it was on the first column 64, on the third column 53. Here it's 40 and 32. The other gaps are quite big, but not as big as math. Something to notice is that, when both in the previous and in this one, when you start controlling for things, it reduces the gap for Black and Hispanic much more than the gap for Asian. Okay, so that's something to remember. Here, here's the thing I like about research. My prior was so different from this, and I like to be proved wrong. I was sure that the lockdowns would actually raise the test score gaps, because we know that the test scores went down. So this shows 2019, they didn't give the exams in 2020. And then the 2021 were looking really weird. There was some remote, a lot of kids didn't do it. So we just threw those out. So think of that as a gap. And then we have them from 2022 to 23, 24, 25. And I'm really surprised that there's just not much change, a little tiny bit of widening, but not very much. So, so that's why we felt comfortable just doing the 2025. And as I said, I've been doing this since 2011, and those gaps just don't change very much over time, even with COVID hitting, which was very surprising.
I think if you look at NAEP, you see that Black-white gaps didn't change much over COVID.
Okay.
But what you saw, low achievers got really killed. And so the gap by achievement level before
Okay.
grows. And so that's where you're seeing the biggest gap.
Now, I could also do other gaps, because I know the percent who meet, the what are the words they use?
Proficient.
Yes, proficient, because they have all of these little variations. And I know that within all these cells. So I could give you a little bit more about the distribution. But I didn't want this to be about COVID, but I could see writing another paper looking at these.
So the
test
gap
scores.
doesn't change, but do they all go down?
Yes, they go, so it really goes down in 21, and then there's some recovery afterwards. Yeah. So the data reporting more recent tests don't distinguish within the Asian American category. As we all know, Asia is a really big place. So it's interesting to see the subgroups. Unfortunately, they still reported that in 2012, back when I wrote the early versions of this talker/paper. So here it is sorted by the math score. All right, so, or math score gap. So the Chinese have the biggest gap with whites, then Korean, Asian Indian, Vietnamese, Japanese, other Asian, Filipino, and then you start getting the negative gaps among Laotian, Hmong, and Cambodian. All right, so people always want to know what it is, because it's a huge group. So that's what they look like.
I guess there's also there could be differential selection among different.
Oh yeah.
You don't have the people selected necessarily from the highest part of the income distribution,
Right.
whereas in the other countries, people have got a very different part of the family income distribution.
Well, you can also think, that the Japanese, so this is the race and culture Thomas Sowell thing, is that the people, when they initially immigrate, they stay separate from particularly Asians, because they don't want to regress to the white mean. And so then the Japanese Americans have probably been in the country a long time, so they're just regressing to the mean, whereas the others, well, the Chinese came before, but there are, a regular flow of Chinese where you haven't had that with.
The argument I often hear is refugees versus selected.
Refugees.
Look at those bottom three categories. And
Absolutely.
there are more refugees in those three categories.
Yeah. Although the Vietnamese,
Stand out.
yes.
Stand out.
So just
This is self-reported by the students, right?
I believe so, or their parents, yeah, typically, but yeah.
So I
yeah.
guess different race parents,
Would be.
we don't know.
Yeah.
what.
No,
Yeah.
Valerie,
Yes.
people who have children in the Palo Alto School District tells me that there's a divide between the American-born Chinese and the immigrant Chinese.
Yep.
And that, but do you have anything on that?
No, I don't have that kind of information here, but I'm gonna give you some information in the time use stuff, because I do have more detail there, because I use a completely different data set for that. Okay. All right, so here are math test score gaps where I've separated the non-economically disadvantaged. It means they don't get the subsidized or free lunch. And then the economically disadvantaged, which means that they do. And then this is by grade. And what you see is that these test score gaps for math grow with each grade. All right, so it just it keeps going on. And then that gap there is, they don't test them between 8th and 11th, but then, you know, that's where it shows up at 11th. Okay, so both for the Asian white and for the Hispanic black. And then if you're wondering why the standard error band is so big for black, particularly at those early grades, it's, you know, less than 5% of the students in the public schools are black. There are more Asians than black. And then only 23% in those lower grades of the black students are not economically disadvantaged. So it's just a small sample thing. Because I kept wondering, why are we getting such thing? You know, you guys probably noticed this. Well, it's just a small sample.
Did I hear you say 5% of the California students are black?
That's what
That's correct. That's about the percentage of the population.
Yeah, it's
Surprised at that, but
Yeah, it's surprisingly small. Now, plenty of Hispanic students, you can see those, you know.
got a hand behind you.
Oh,
Sorry,
yes.
I'm right behind you.
Yeah.
Is there any censoring in the data? So I imagine that some of these cells are quite small when you start to split a minority ethnic group into.
Yeah, if they get too small, they won't report them. So there are some missing kinds of things within school. Yeah.
Is there a concern that they're missing and not reporting is potentially driving some of the?
I doubt it is, but you know, one should always check if they can, but I can't.
Valerie,
Yes.
one variable that you haven't put in here is the average salary of the teachers, which I suspect is available. And that varies a great deal across.
But this is within school. All of this
this
stuff
is-
has the school times
Okay.
grade interactions. Yeah.
Well,
School and grade.
Yeah.
within school and grade.
Within a grade, within a school.
Yeah.
It's
But
just the
I'm
classroom.
Same
did it.
classrooms.
Yeah, the classroom could be different.
The
Yes.
classroom could be different.
Yes.
But the salary will
Yeah.
be decent.
And then I actually know a lot. So if you think of classrooms being different in these schools, well, the way I got into the local school politics was when Scott Baker's mother asked if I would be the representative for the gifted program at my son's elementary school. So there is this sort of gifted thing, but there are two levels of gifted. And the not super, you know, 0.1%, they're integrated with the other students, and then they kind of give it. So it's not a great program. You know, you don't get a lot. But then there's the special, what was it called? I should remember this. Yeah, everybody wanted to get in that because they actually got separate classes. But that's a very, very small number of people. And then the English language arts, remember that the test score gaps weren't as big. They go up just slightly with each grade, but it's not like the math.
You know, the tests changing also like by each grade such that there's greater ability to differentiate? I don't know, like fair.
That's a good, I'm gonna ask the experts
Could you
here.
repeat the question? I didn't
Yeah.
hear.
Are the tests, presumably they're changing at every grade, so is it possible that the tests themselves are having less ability to differentiate at the lower grades?
Yes, it's possible. Psychometricians have their own magic and they try to make these the same, but
I think
you do have the standard deviations.
Yes.
And I don't
And
know.
they do go up quite a bit. Well, the standard deviation goes up across grades and much more than the mean test score, because the mean test score does go up across, they're supposed to, but that standard is, you really see the, and so that's why here, I looked at it as a fraction of third grade standard deviation, because if I use the other, then I'm just kind of undercutting my point about the fanning out.
I mean, I think the bigger difference is, didn't they change the test in 2019 to the smarter balanced assessment from the others?
Yeah, but you know,
These
these numbers
No, I'm
are
just-
so similar to what I got in 2012, what I got.
In terms of his question as
Yeah.
to change, I think there was a whole new test
No,
protocol put in 2019.
yeah, but his point is, does it change across the grades? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But no, I've done this for so many, you know, since at least the 2011 grades, I think. All right, so there are significant differences in test scores across ethnic groups. When I control for school and SES, the Black Hispanic test score gaps fall by 40 to 50%, but the Asian American test score gaps fall by only 20 to 25%, and the gaps grow with each grade. Okay, so why is average Asian American achievement so high relative to other groups? So this is where it's useful to think about a production function, and Rick has written a lot about educational production functions, and then thinking about the endogenous choices, because this is going to make it clear why so far I'm only showing you correlations. All right, so the idea is that the knowledge of student I at the end of grade G is this KIG, and then we have this production function, and it's going to be a function of the knowledge that you had at the end of the previous grade, and assuming everybody had the same depreciation over summer in their knowledge, which could be different actually. And then SIG is an index of the quality adjusted school inputs. AIG is the student's innate cognitive abilities or speed of learning. HCIG is the hours devoted to class attendance. HW is to studying and homework. FIG is family inputs, for example, parental time spent on education. And then epsilon IG is just the idiosyncratic student grade shock. So there is a lot of literature talking about S, which is important, but I'm going to just focus on time use for the students and for the family inputs. And I'm gonna, because there's some variation for class attendance, but what I'm going to show you is mostly the hours spent on studying and homework, because that's where you see the big difference, right?
But the other points about time use, I guess you already have this implicit. Time use is also endogenous, right? So
oh yeah,
it's good in some sense.
Oh, and in fact, I came across the perfect paper that the reason I've been waiting 14 years is I was waiting for that paper to be written. It really, turns out it was written in 2020, but it's now forthcoming in JP, and I just happened to find it. But I'm going to talk about that, and that's where I would like a lot of input from people. All right, so I'm going to lump all the school inputs, the kind of stuff everybody else has done. I'm just thinking of that as a single index. This is more just a theoretical framework, because I'm focusing on the non-school inputs. So culture is not a direct input, as I said, into the educational production function. It can affect achievement only through its effects on these direct inputs. So what I'm submitting is, I think, a key non-school input that's affected by culture would be student hours, and then also parental hours, and I'll show you some of that. Okay, so school inputs S, cognitive ability A, and family inputs F can affect the productivity of student study hours. And the observed time that we see students spent studying is an endogenous outcome that depends on the school inputs. They're the cognitive ability and the family inputs. So here's the paper that I wish I'd seen a few years ago, although I was still so busy doing fiscal. The Cotton, Hickman, List, and Price. Why don't struggling students do their homework? Disentangling motivation and study productivity as drivers of human capital formation. It's a really good paper, but very long and dense. And I've read some parts really carefully, but this is something that I wanted to. And I had my undergraduate RAs say, has there been anything recently since I looked at this before? They weren't able, but this came out as an MBR working paper just a couple weeks ago. So that's why I didn't have a chance to tell you guys about it. All right, so at this point, I'm only showing a correlation, not a causal relationship, but the things that they talk about are just really important for thinking about the endogeneity. And they ran an RCT and put their data up. And right now, had I not been messing around with trying to deal with all the sun coming into my office, I might have actually figured out what those variable names were and could have done that. But anyway, that'll leave you wanting more. All right, so yeah.
Two questions related, sort of. So you don't have what economists would call non-cognitive skills in the production function. So
oh yeah, no, you're right.
How should I think about it, especially in the context of Heckman paper and motivation, perseverance?
Yes.
We know that there are racial ethnic differences in, for instance,
Right.
how many items students complete on a test.
Yes, so I can probably answer that better when at the end I start talking about the cotton, because they're talking about motivation, you saw the title versus the other. I didn't put that in mind, but the way I see it is that is not a direct input that's affecting the time use. So that's what I'm trying to distinguish between those. So the time use will be an endogenous response to their psychic cost of studying, what they perceive are the gains to studying, and their productivity in studying is the idea.
Yeah, but that's gonna be correlated with both test scores and time use potentially, so you have a much
Yes.
variables bias.
Well, so that's why I'm going to talk about this RCT.
And the other question I had is how much of that is driven by just Asian students being better at testing?
Better
You know, teaching to the test and just being mentally, unobservably better in performing. Like I would
that
be
would be
interested
the
in.
kind of thing. So you're saying that even if they study the same amount, they'll just do better on that test?
Yeah.
Okay, well, see if you think, I think that if once I show you the differences, you'll say, well, why would they be doing this if that's the case? But you could argue back against that. All right, so I'm using the American Time Use Survey, which I've been using for a long time. That's from the BLS. It's nationally represented samples based on time diaries, which is the best way to measure time use, because recall, so there are a number of studies where they ask students, how much do you study? And I know from my Center of Work and Leisure and my home, the recall stuff, I had to have a long appendix to argue against Jeremy Greenwood on this, because he was using recall stuff. And so you want to use time diaries, okay? Now, the only issue is this survey covers individuals ages 15 and up. I actually, somewhere along the way, started because I also did a paper on grandparent time, which is still not a paper, but I presented in Paris. But in the context of doing that, I somehow managed, well, I used Daniela DeBoca's thing, the Child Development Supplement of the PSID, which actually has serious time use diaries and stuff. I have to say that's the most complicated data set I've ever dealt with. But the problem is trying to get enough Asians in any data set that's not in California. But now there are more, and I actually want to use it. So if anybody here is an expert in the Child Development Supplement, I would love to talk to you, because it's the kind of thing where it's almost, sometimes I feel like my brain is frying from trying to decide which of the many PSID things that you have to link. You're looking knowingly, so maybe you have used the Child Development Supplement. Okay, so I combined 2013, 19, 2022, 24. I just leave out the whole COVID year and follow-up year in order to get enough observations for each group. So one good thing about my weighting is that when I first started out, there were barely over 100 Asian high school students in my sample, and now there are over 300. So weighting had an advantage in that every year the American Time Use Survey adds more, and so then I have more students. So yeah, 350, which is very exciting. Okay, definitions of some key activities that I'll show you. So class is taking class for degree, certification, license, or test prep. Studying is also kind of similar, but for degree. Other research not related to personal interests. Chores is household chores, care for family members, shopping for groceries or gas. The reason I do that is anytime you're talking about teenagers, you don't want to put clothes shopping in home production, because for teenagers, it's a leisure activity. No, going to the mall is a leisure activity. So anyway, so that's why I put that there. And that was important in my Century of Work and Leisure paper. Okay, work for pay. Leisure, I'll talk about socializing, sports, TV, computer, and then sleep, extracurricular, volunteering, and religious activities. Those are sort of self-explanatory. All right, so
Can I ask
here's
a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Does the time use data distinguish academic sport, I mean, sports as part of a school experience?
No, they don't. As far as I know, back then they didn't. So it was like if it was Little League or school, it was just considered sport and was in the leisure category. But I can look back at that again because the education category is just, kind of like other countries where schools are for education and then sports is over here. So the sports in schools is kind of unusually American.
Valerie, when we think
Yeah.
about a high school student's production function of schooling, how much of it comes from the current investment in time compared to historical investment in time, inputs, and other things?
The historical investment is vitally important because it goes into that K lag one. So all of that past part goes into that. Now, it's not only that, but this wonderful Cotton et al. Paper talks about an idea from the literature, and they find evidence for it, which is the more like homework problems you do and get right, it speeds up your learning. And it's what my mother-in-law was a really good teacher, became principal. And she always said, now I understand, she says, she'd have a distribution of skills. She said, but you always have to give kids something they can do because they learn from that, even if they're not up at the same standards. Otherwise, they just give up and don't learn anything. So yes, that's really, really important.
Playing an instrument considered studying or leisure?
That would be leisure. Okay, so.
Some of us believe that there are a lot of life lessons you learn by playing sports, by the way.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not saying.
Well.
Yes, but you could say these are different. So when I say education, I'm talking about normal academic, but because I'm going to show you some interesting things about differences across groups on how they spend their time too. But first, so this was the chart I got back in 2010 when I was wondering about all those piles of CH last names. And I was blown away. So this is hours per week spent studying. Asian is almost 15, Black is 4, Hispanic is 5.5, and whites are 6. Now, something I need to tell you is that other than this being nationally representative and the test scores being California, something else that's really important is the California test scores are involving almost all Hispanics, whereas the people who are willing to answer national surveys from the BLS, people who are not documented don't like to answer those surveys, all right? So these are gonna be, think of this as documented Hispanics, whereas the California test scores is a mix of, many different levels of documentation. Yeah.
What are you doing with the two or more races?
That is okay, let me remember. In this case, and I'm thinking I should do it the way I did it for the thing, I actually just dropped them just to make it easier.
That number seems to be growing over time.
I know. So, so we'll see if I can continue dropping them and still having a good sample size.
You'll lose your 300.
I know, yeah.
Yes, this is trending though, isn't it?
What?
These are trending over time. I mean, you can't see it for Asian, but if you looked at the whites, you would see trends over time. The amount of time spent on homework.
Oh, are some, and I need to look that again with the updated data, but I haven't had a chance. And again, part of it is I just don't want to split it up anymore because of my 300, but I could do it with whites. No, that's a good idea.
Do
Yeah.
they add? I'm curious whether the number add up.
Oh yes, that's the nice thing about time diaries. It has to add to 168 hours per week. Yes, so it's really important. And Gary always kids me. He says, you do all this time use surveys or, research, and somehow you think that there are more than 168 hours in a week. You forget the time constraint. And in case you're interested, even though my focus here is on K through 12, college, all right? So the non-Asian laggards catch up some with the selectivity of getting into college, but the Asian college students are still studying a lot more than the others. And part of that is what majors they're choosing. Yeah. As my son, you know, who was an engineering major, he says, there are the majors that make you do problem sets and then the other ones, you know, so. Okay, so how do high school students spend their time? So each column, white, Asian, Black, Hispanic, and red denotes the max across the group. So Asians spend the most time going to class, but you can see there's not a big difference there. That's why I didn't bother showing you the histograms. And then the whites actually go to class the least. All right, so that's what the green in the thing. So then study, that's just the histogram I showed you. Asian is, you know, almost 15, the low is Black at 4. Work, so this is work for pay. So whites are spend the most time working for pay, and Asians spend the least time, because right, this has to add up. Where is all that time that's going into studying coming from? So this kind of tells you. So chores, actually Hispanic students do the most chores and Black students do the least. These are high school students, remember. Sleep, Asians sleep the least, and Blacks sleep the most. You know, and there's like four hours difference on the average. Socializing, whites socialize the most, Asians socialize the least. And that's going to the movies with friends, all that kind of stuff, you know, on the phone, that kind of thing. The TV/computer, Asians do the least, Blacks do the most. Read and write, this is a depressing row. Can you imagine? And this is for leisure, you know, reading or writing for leisure, you know, it's really, really low. So, you know, they're all depressingly low, I would just say. Sports, whites do the most, Asians the least. And this is, you know, Amy Chua also mentioned this. Other extracurricular activities, you know, it's pretty small amounts. Volunteering, Asian the most, Blacks the least. Religious, Blacks the most, Asians the least. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of where some of these hours are coming from.
Is there a way to separate the study hours into self-study versus?
I can figure out if they're with somebody else. Yeah, so I had looked at, were they with a family adult? You know, I can do that. But with peers, that's a good point. Can I do peers? Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if the Who file, I can't remember if the Who file contains peers, but I could look at that because that's an interesting idea. That's the great thing, is that with the time use data, you can just be so nosy and just figure out, you know, almost what the neighbors are doing, you know. Okay, so how much of the 9-hour study gap is explained by family background? So this is going to show results of a regression that also controls for parent education income and whether foreign born, and I'll actually show you the coefficients of those because they're interesting. Okay, so once you put in a lot of controls, the Asian white gap falls from 9 to 6.85. So it's still big and significant. The gap for Black and Hispanic falls a lot more. So it's just like we saw with the test scores. All right, males study less, and then we have indicators whether the mother has college. When I say only, it means not a grad degree, dad college only, and then mom grad degree, dad grad, you know, basically the more education of your parents, the more the student studies. And notice if there's no dad around, then all of those have zeros. Okay, so that's kind of the way to think about it. If you have a foreign parent, you study more. If you're foreign born, you study more. And then log of family income. So I took the income, it was top coded, but then I used the Emmanuel Sayers the thresholds and imputed the top coded stuff. So that's important, but not a huge amount. And so the controls matter, but there's still a huge gap in time spent by Asians. So they studied 9 more hours per week than white and Hispanics, 11 more hours than Black students, and only 23% of the Asian white gap can be explained by parental education, income, and foreign born status. Yeah.
You don't know who has formal, you know, goes to math outside tutoring.
Yeah. So,
As opposed to just the same books.
so that's a good question. I could look at, I wonder if I could look at is there a where file? I have to see if there is. I'm not sure, but one of the things, so talking to colleagues and co-authors who are Asian, I learned about the Saturday schools, all right? So just for those who don't know about the Saturday schools, so for example, my former student and co-author now Shigeru Fujita, and then also Takeo Hoshi would tell me that for Japanese businessmen, since it's usually men, in the US, if they're over in the US for a while, but they think that they're likely to return, they want their children to keep up with the Japanese curriculum. So they have these Saturday Japanese schools. Now they also have like Chinese schools and Korean schools. So I gave this talk in Seoul, South Korea in fall 2022. And I heard all about, because some of them had lived in the US for a while. And they learn the culture, but then they're also trying to keep up with the curriculum. I want to double check this. I couldn't find a spike on Saturday for the Asian, but I want to look at that. So don't quote me on that. I meant to do a tabulation, but I didn't get a chance to do it.
Valerie, there is also the so-called kumon.
The yeah,
Those
yeah.
kind of things.
No, that could very well be that.
This is more formal.
Yes.
So that.
But that would be that would be included.
It would be.
It's included because I made sure to, and then I also had a study narrow and a study broad. And luckily I wrote notes to my future stuff saying they just look so similar. It wasn't worth distinguishing, and I just used study narrow.
But what I'm curious is, this is just a fact, this is under homework category would fall?
Yes, this would be under homework or studying
So
so like if you go to an SAT prep course.
Right, could you separate how much of that is even, because it goes
I
a
could
little
do
bit
it.
to the question.
You know what
about
I can do?
Do they teach themselves to perform to the test? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, it doesn't change your result, but it would be interesting.
It would be
what Chris was saying.
okay. I know what time they do every activity. I mean, I have those files. I didn't need them. The question is when school gets out and when those others start. So it's going to be a little mushy because I'm not going to go look up every single area and figure out what time it's not possible to do it. But you could look at what day code is studying over the time of the day.
Yeah, so in the
And time of the
afternoon when
week.
the white kids are playing basketball.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, that's a very good point.
Paula had a
Yes.
great question, which I'm gonna pass on. So you'd think for 9 hours a week of studying, they'd be doing better than they are.
Yeah.
So no. So this is something that's been a subject of conversation at our family dinner tables. And so Gary says that they're going up to a marginal product of 0 or negative. Yeah. But then the question is, think of it as a tournament, right? There's a tournament to get into medical school. There's a tournament to get into any grad school, right? And so even if you're learning, if that somehow increases your probability of winning that tournament, then the private return is high, right?
You don't even have to know that it's a tournament. It could just be the productivity that you get from 20 points extra on your achievement is, translates into wages just in a free market. So
Yeah.
We don't know that.
We don't know. And so this is something, first I've got to solve causality on this, but I would love to look at something else where I could see what the returns were to all that extra studying.
The cost could be also lower, right? So you can have a lower cost of investing. Yeah?
So
psychological cost, and I think that's what culture, the cultural.
No, it's not a low. Well, so let's talk when I get to the discussing that cotton paper at the end and where I want to, because they lay things out so nice between the motivation and the productivity of studying. But that could definitely be a possibility. Okay. How important are parental time inputs across groups? Okay. So I use the same American Time Use Survey to measure how parents spend their time. I study only parents with children under the age of, 18 or under. and time spent with children for all ages of children up to 18 years. Okay, so this is unconditional. So, obviously you could have different numbers of children and all of that. Here is primary childcare, all right? Educational childcare is a subcategory of primary childcare. So primary means that is what you list as your first activity in your time use diary, okay? And educational is a subcategory of that. We can just look there. So Asians spend a little bit more in primary care and a little bit more in educational childcare, both mothers and fathers. And again, the red is the high across the groups and the green is the low across the groups. Now, secondary childcare is, say you're cooking, but then you're monitoring the kids' homework. I always have this canonical example. I wonder if it's the case, because there's just not much difference there. And I thought, well, maybe the white parents tell their kids to go up to their room to do their homework, and the parents are cooking and the kids are really on social media. Whereas maybe the Asian parents say, no, you do your homework right here where I can watch you while I'm cooking. But, I'm not seeing a lot of that. I mean, I guess fathers have the high for the secondary childcare, but not the mothers. The secondary childcare is the highest for Hispanic. And then time with children. So this is where I can use the WHO file and say, are you in the same room with your child? And, I'm not seeing a big difference there for the Asian Americans. And then when I put in controls, here's the difference, the gaps with whites. With no controls, that's what the differences were in terms of what I showed you. Some are statistically significant. And then you put in controls for the number, age of children, because that really matters, particularly if you have an infant. Education, foreign, some of them get big time with mothers. No, it's negative, right? Because this is the Asian white gap. So it's just not very much coming out of this. I mean, the educational child care is statistically significant, but it's basically around half an hour per week. Yes.
What do you do if there's no platter?
They wouldn't answer in this. So I'm glad you asked. So there's a lot of selection here, because what you need to do for each group is say, okay, mothers plus some fraction don't, have fathers and some fraction don't. And
we just know that Asians have the most stable families.
Yeah, and it's
in the US.
And it's not just that. My grandparent paper that used the child development supplement was trying to ask the question whether grandparents can substitute when the father's not there. But what I found there was, I didn't find much of that. But I did find that white grandparents are underperforming on time spent with children relative to all the three other ethnic groups. But because I was interested in the total family thing, and that's what the child development supplement is so good for.
I'm not sure how the time use data set's constructed, and I was having two thoughts. One is to what extent one might be worried that the Asian American kids might survey bias towards reporting the studying as opposed to something else. And second, let's give an example. Okay, there's an hour, you have 5 minutes on a phone call, the other 55 minutes, I don't know, reading a book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's particularly where you'd have to worry with the recall. But they kind of the interviewer say, okay, at 6 p.m., what were you doing and how long did it last? And this is for the previous day. And so I think that overcomes some of that worry about that. And sometimes you can do cross-checking. So when Gary and I did the Rugrat race, we were, one worries whether educated parents will over-report the amount of time they spend on childcare and education and things like that. And so then we would also look to see if the children were reporting similar kinds of things and getting similar numbers. So you haven't done that here, but that's a way to at least cross-check. So it's basically an extra half hour a week, which maybe is a really productive half hour a week. I don't know, but it's still such a small amount. It's unlikely that that would be an enhancement. I also looked at children doing their studying with their parents. So I actually did that, and also found these kinds of small amounts, across differences. And then that's when I wrote this, is there a tiger mother effect? Amy Chua liked this thing. These tiger mothers seem to be able to make their children spend much more time studying without having to spend more of their own time. Perhaps this is what Chua's Chinese discipline is all about. I like it because I thought, man, because it can take a long time to get kids to do studying, if you're not efficient about it. All right, so perfect. So causality and quantification. All right, so does the extra time spent studying actually cause the higher test scores? So I'm going to summarize some of the existing evidence from the literature on causal effects of studying, and then talk about the possibility of using the data from this Cotton et al. RCT. So my colleague at UCSD, Julian Betts, was one of the first economists to sort of look at this. He used the LSAY, which I can't remember what that stands for, and he found that an extra half hour of math homework assigned per night to students boosts math achievement by almost 2 grade equivalents. Okay, but that's an intent to treat. So, and he didn't have a measure of the hours, but still, it's certainly suggestive. And then McMullen used the Nels 88 regression with student fixed effects and was trying to take variation in homework assigned across years as an instrument for the student reported homework hours. Found 1 extra hour of math homework per week raises test scores by 0.18 standard deviation. So reasonable causality. I mean, there are a lot of, through the literature where people are trying to deal with causality, and I think it's, these are what I think are some of the more successful ones. And then there's this, I love the 2008 Stein-Rickner study.
So within a year, or how long does it take?
This was usually within a year. They showed the short run.
Grade equivalence in 1 year.
Yeah. His was, and in fact, I remember when he was presenting an early version of this, I remember Bouter Den Haan and I said, can you calculate what the implied wage is of that studying? And he did that, and it was big. Yeah, math.
Question on the previous set of
yeah.
Your time use, there's no school fixed effects, right? And
no,
there like large variation across schools in terms of how much homework they're assigning.
Oh, definitely there can be. Now, in the work that I did with Ling Xiao, which was in its dissertation, we just never got around to submitting that one. We were able to control for schools because we were using the ECLS, was it Eccles? Kind of thing. And so we could control for that, and we were still finding differences in time use, but the time use measure wasn't as good. It was more recall and stuff. So that's why I hadn't spent as much time on that one. Stein-Rickner and Stein-Rickner 2008, I love it. Random assignment of roommates in college at La Brea College. And then being assigned to a roommate who brings an Xbox from home reduces study time by 45 minutes per day and reduces GPA by 0.25. That's a really good natural experiment. But that's for college, and I'm wanting to look at before college. So that's why I was so excited to find this Cotton et al. Paper that does this RCT on 5th and 6th graders, and it gives monetary awards for successful completion of math problems. And it's an online system, and they really try to do it so it's similar to what the curriculum is. I think it's mostly in Chicago. They have several treatments, how much they pay for it. So there's the more generous down to the less generous, and then of course the control group. And then they do pre and post standardized math assessments for them. And so then they're the ones that talk about this thing. So it's very interesting because you can see from the question, a lot of people say it's just lack of motivation, but they find that study productivity is this big driver of how much time they decide to do on the homework, how much they try. And so this students giving up, some of it is because those hours that they spend won't be as productive. So they really emphasize the heterogeneity and they look at all of that. But I like that because, ideally I want to see if I vary a culture that emphasizes education across groups, okay? How do I match that to, somebody else's RCT? Well, I think that the culture is affecting your perception of the rewards. And it might be because your parents whack you if you don't, of studying or not studying. And so even though it's monetary, and typically the culture won't be monetary in the short run, that varying those rewards for successful completion of homework can help, get the kind of causality I'd like to look at.
The cultural literature, a lot of people work on the perception of time.
The perception of time. Yes, because in your paper in economic policy too.
Also,
yes.
There is this perception of, there are some culture that put way more weight on the future.
Right.
And you see this through language and so on. And so, I think that I'm not so sure it's going in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily I'm pretty sure the parents also emphasize this, but the question of, sacrificing the future, the present for the future is driven by the fact that the future is more valuable than the present in some culture than in others.
Right. But I think that is, so
the cost
think about students who, what is the disutility you get from studying, all right? I think you could have suppose they all have the same productivity, but we know that that's not the case, but suppose they all have the same productivity of studying and they have sort of the same disutility, but if the perceived benefit is higher, then they study more. And I'm an outsider of the cultural literature, but it strikes, I'm trying, that's their paper made me be able to really make concrete sort of these vague ideas I had, that it's more their perception of the reward that is inducing the studying.
But it could be also the cost of the time.
Well, no, then there's the cost of the time. And then also how much you think you gain in terms of that ultimate reward. If you're just...
It's a discounting. It
yeah.
could be a discount factor.
Yeah. No, but then that's the reward because you're doing cost benefit and the cost is now. So the cost is it doesn't matter how much discounting there is if everybody's feeling that same cost right now, but then there's the reward later. And then that's where the discounting really comes in. That's...
What about overconfidence?
What?
Overconfidence.
Well,
how much homework do you think you need to do to get that reward/grade?
Okay, so you might have misperception. So some of it could be imperfect information across groups.
It's not necessarily that. I give you an example.
Okay.
Which is coming from the cultural literature. Early on, when Italian Americans arrived in the US, they were highly discriminated.
Yeah.
But if you look at the accounts, what people were telling their kids, they were telling them, if you work very hard, you're going to succeed, even though at the time was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a bit self-fulfilling, then you work very hard and then it
Right.
becomes self-fulfilling. It's not really overconfidence, but it's in this idea of what beliefs do you have that your effort today
Right.
is going to lead to success?
Yes.
If you're convinced that no matter what you do, you're never going to achieve anything.
Right.
The cost of investing today.
No, but it's not the cost. I'm saying that doesn't change the cost today. It changes your perception of the benefit.
Yeah, I understand the perception of the benefit.
No, but see, that's a big thing, and that's in trying to link up
the cost
various
versus the
RCTs.
benefit, that's what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
Right? The cost is fixed, but
The cost is fixed, but the benefit, and see, that's why I like, so you could imagine an RCT that somehow increases the cost of studying because somebody plays loud music, or, well, I guess for some students that's better, but somehow increases the cost of studying. Like, for example,
Xbox does.
No, exactly, exactly.
Yes.
No, that's perfect, yes. So that is increasing the opportunity cost right now of studying. See, that's perfect. Thank you.
You can tell us the results. I mean, how much they pay them? How much did
No, So as I said, I was trying to, so there's 3 different categories. I've downloaded the replication files. I've only managed to see definitions of, and they have variables in a file. I got out of MATLAB, put in an Excel file, and they have definitions of some of the variables, but I'm poking through there trying to figure out which variable is which, because I hate running a regression thinking I have something and I had the wrong variable. So
what did they say? I mean, so
what did they didn't run this regression. Theirs was this big structural model trying to figure out heterogeneity and it's a really neat paper, but I said it is really long and really dense. So it might be in there, but I couldn't find it with a few hours with the paper, but I didn't read it, cover to cover. So
you could do this and not tell us we paid the kid $10 an hour. And
no, they did. I'm just looking for but they weren't trying to answer this question. They were trying to figure out how much of these test score gaps and stuff was due to different motivation versus different study productivity. So they're actually saying that the motivation wasn't.
What are you trying to do? Can you explain?
I'm trying to find an RCT or natural experiment where they are varying the actual or perceived gains to putting in an hour of study.
Okay. And
Okay.
you have
I think I have one.
Okay.
Roland Fryer, a couple weeks ago, was talking about some work that he did in Houston, and he went to some of the very high performing charter school networks
Okay.
and did some really intensive time motion study of how the students, how the school itself created learning experiences for kids.
Mhm.
And then he took that model and created an RCT in other Houston schools.
Okay.
And among the things that they drew on were task time in the classroom.
All right.
And other time-based elements of education.
Okay.
So I think you can
Okay,
find
I'll look at that to
Yeah.
see.
But you want this to be intersected with culture? I'm a little bit confused.
No.
where culture comes in.
So my working assumption is that culture affects the benefits.
But you're never going to be able to prove it if you don't have variation in culture. Because the other thing, the other important thing, I understand you keep on going from benefits and cost.
Yeah.
But there is also for example, the socialization is way more important for certain culture and not others, right? So that's the cost.
So define socialization.
Yeah, hanging out with your.
Okay, socializing.
So
Okay.
then the cost of spending time now.
Yes.
So
okay, so it could be that. Yes.
Could be that as
okay.
well, right?
If you're a claim for winning the basketball tournament or for
Right.
Exactly.
But I have to see what the sample sizes are, but I saw that they had an Asian indicator in this, that they combine white and Asian in one group and black and Hispanic in the other. It's not a gigantic RCT. But so I could look, so that's what I'm really excited about, trying to figure out what's actually in that data. Yeah.
There is one more experiment by your former colleagues at UCSD that actually targets exactly this question. So Yuri Gnezi, Sally Sadov, and a bunch of other people actually ran incentivized experiments with PISA, I think, tests, and versus high versus low stakes and Asians versus whites. And basically what they show is that the racial gap is much larger in low stakes than in high stakes tests. So basically, Asians perform no matter the stakes, whereas white Americans just slack when the stakes are not there. So there's variation in effort, basically.
Because I'd seen Sally's work with John List that wasn't published, but this is another one with.
I think John List might have been also on this paper.
Okay.
I just know that.
What was it? Do you recall if it was published?
AR Insights, I think.
Okay.
One is AR PNP.
Okay, great. No, so I will I love it when other people generate RCT data for me.
So are you looking at the nonlinearities of the effects of time?
Oh.
Time, is that what?
Well, I would love to, but right now it's just seeing is there a causal channel in a mostly linear model? But then, if there are other data sets to be able to see what these nonlinearities are, because the question is, why are they spending so much more time? And what is it, getting them?
Yeah, one other story, I mean, I don't know, one other story is that if these are first generation, I don't know if they're first or second generation, but in our paper, the second generation, start converging to the so if these are first generation, there is a lot of uncertainty in what matters. And so imagine you have uncertainty about what's going to make you successful.
Precautionary studying.
You do
I like that.
precautionary studying. You say, well, I'm going to really invest a lot because, I don't know what's going to, so, as a family, you don't know what's going to work.
So I do have that in my time use, is whether they're foreign born or not.
Yeah, so maybe that would be useful.
Well, and there was a positive coefficient on it.
Yeah.
So
but you're seeing that for studying it, but you're not seeing it for some of the other activities, for example, the sports and so forth, that certainly in the American dream is part of the success. They're not over investing in those as well. So there's a very systematic, deliberate, not precautionary, everything increase.
Yeah, but they're really, many of these immigrants, they come in because they want to succeed. I understand.
But it's a narrow.
I understand there is this view that sports really help people, but I don't think it's part of the equation in the majority of the countries. Maybe England. So that's I think the fundamental thing is jobs, right?
But if the perceptions are different, you just defined in essence of culture.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for all the comments. This was really helpful.
Thank you, Valerie.